Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan, and today we have a very special guest with us, Mike Rinder. Mike Rinder has been a presence in my head since the 80s, but Mike, I didn't get to meet you in person until the first season or the end of the first season of the A&E special with Leah Remini and you. And I remember that moment where I was sitting next to you having the surreal thing that I'm sitting next to the guy who used to petrify me and used to, be the architect of Office of Special Affairs attacks on my friends like John Atack and Jerry Armstrong and other people who were left and spoke out against the group. But man, I'm so thrilled that you have taken up the mantle to expose this criminal organization that I believe is a trafficking organization, labor trafficking at the very least. In fact, the title of your book, Your Billion Year, I mean, that's the Sea Org contract, right? And you were how old? You were in high school when you were asked to sign?
I just graduated high school, Steve.
Oh, my goodness.
I joined the Sea Organization as soon as I graduated high school.
And you were raised in the cult. Your parents got involved, I believe, when you were 5 years old. And so you know Hubbard. You've been on the ship with Hubbard. You were involved with their tax exemption, hard press, and the fraud that was involved with that. You know celebrities. I mean, there's so much I want to cover. But we want people to read your book and to also listen to your current podcast called Fair Game, as well as look at, episodes from the award-winning show with Leah as well. But let's start with Fair Game, if we may, because that's the title of your podcast. Explain for our listeners what you did as a leader in Scientology, former number 3 man, I believe, and then what they did to you, and you got to be on the receiving end.
Well, Steve, fair game is a term that describes the policies of L. Ron Hubbard. And for anybody unfamiliar with Scientology, Hubbard is the undisputed guru of the subject. What he wrote, what he said is absolute law in Scientology. It is not to be interpreted. It's not to be treated like it's parables. It is to be read literally and applied exactly. Mm-hmm. And Hubbard developed various things. Everything that he wrote, he called a technology. It's not teachings. It's not sci-fi. It's not stories. It's not anything. It's a technology. And the idea of that is to make it seem like it is somehow scientifically based and works every time, which is the claim of Hubbard. If you apply the technology exactly as I have written it, it works 100% of the time. What's unique about Scientology, or one of the things that's unique about Scientology, is Hubbard didn't just write things about like spirituality in the subject of Scientology. He wrote about how you destroy your enemies, how you engage in intelligence programs to get them fired from their jobs, how you harass them, how you threaten them with lawsuits, how you bring lawsuits just to wear them down. And this is all part of the, quote, scripture of Scientology. And that's why I say it's unique. I don't know of any other organization that claims to be a religious organization that has directives that lay out how you go about spying on people and how you go about harassing them. And
criminal activities. And I just remembered the raid that the FBI did of the headquarters that resulted in Mary Sue Hubbard going to jail and the government infiltration of the buildings.
Yes. Well, those people were following what Hubbard laid out to do.
Right.
This term, fair game, is a term that was sort of used to describe how we treat our enemies. But because it involved unsavory things, it became a public relations problem. So Hubbard then decided that he was going to issue a new policy for Scientology that said the use of the term fair game is canceled. However, if you actually read what he said, it said the use of the term fair game is canceled because it creates bad public relations. However, we are not changing any of our policies on how we treat our enemies.
Right.
So today, Scientology says, oh, fair game, there's no such thing. Scientology isn't involved in fair game. Look at this. Hubbard canceled it. It was like a brief flash in the pan in the 1960s. Actually, the term they stopped using, but the practices carried on just the same. And this is what is, in my mind, Steve, the problem with Scientology's tax-exempt status is that there is a principle in tax law and in exempt organizations law that says that you can't be in violation of public policy and be tax-exempt. But the only definition that there is for what is public policy, which is a very broad term, and it is intended to sort of imply or cover things that are the societal norms. You know, you don't go around, beating children. You don't go, like that would be a violation of public policy. It's also a violation of the law and battery and this and that. But there's sort of this thing in the IRS code that says you can't be in violation of public policy. Unfortunately, there is only one thing that defines what public policy is, which is the Bob Jones University case, where there was litigation between the IRS and Bob Jones, a very religion-based university, and they were found to have had discriminatory entrance practices, racially discriminatory. So it has come to be believed that the law of public policy is defined by the Bob Jones University case. And that's not the case.
No.
It certainly is one of the definitions. Racial discrimination is a violation of public policy. There are many other things that are too, but there's no law about them. And Scientology is engaged in practices when your tax dollars, when everybody who's listening here, their tax dollars are being used to subsidize Scientology hiring private investigators to follow and harass people, paying to have ads placed on Google. I mean, they spend enormous amounts of money. Right now, if you Google my name or the name of my book, the first thing that pops up is an ad. Who is Mike Rinder? He's a wife beater. He's a child abuser. He's a this. He's a that. Paid for.
I beat and torture people and kidnap them.
Right.
So I understand that lies.
But that is all paid for with tax-exempt money, which means you are subsidizing that.
Right.
And all the lawyers that they hire and the smear sites that they buy. I mean, they've got thousands of URLs to make sure that every possible name of anybody who might be an enemy of theirs or declared an enemy of theirs, they have the URLs to put up websites like Who is Mike Rinder? And they probably got a Who is Steve Hassan website. I don't know. I haven't looked for a while.
League. I'm on two things related to one's best friends with Leah, and the other one I think is Stan League, and they're just lying about me as an anti-religious bigot who beats and tortures people and deprograms them from their religion.
Right. And what is remarkable about that, Steve, and is sort of remarkable to me and remains remarkable to me, is that because most people in the world are decent people who don't believe that someone would just tell bald-faced lies. They read these things and they go, maybe there's something to this.
Right.
Because they know they would not pay Google to put up an ad that's just based entirely on nothing. It's just lies. Mm-hmm. One of the great revelations I had, Steve, after I left was reading this wonderful book by Martha Stout called The Sociopath Next Door, which it really changed my perspective about these things and opened my eyes to a lot of things. And, you know, why Scientology is able to get away with as much as they're able to get away with is in large part because most people are decent people and they project themselves into the activities of others and look at them through their eyes rather than seeing what they really are doing.
Yeah, they can't imagine a malignant narcissist who has no empathy and is a pathological liar and thinks they're above the law. And that the ends justify the means. Mike Rinder is a danger to the org, and therefore we should harass him to try to shut him up or get people not to trust Mike Rinder because of the lies that we tell. And this is the world we're living in, is this disinformation, information warfare moment.
Right.
And but I feel like us former members, if I can include you as one of the more public and honestly courageous, to be like, come at me, buddy. I used to do that, and you ain't gonna stop me, dude. I remember seeing you do that a few years ago on camera. I was go, Mike. I was saying. Amazing. But so in this moment of time, my understanding is there's maybe 20,000 real believers in the world, and they advertise 8 billion, or how many do they claim?
Well, they claim that depends on the circumstance. You know, those numbers that they throw out. They go from millions to 10 million. They went up to 14 million at one point. Mm-hmm. They are somewhat more reticent to put any number on it. We've just got a lot of people. But my estimate is 25,000 around the world.
Yeah.
And, that's the sort of hardcore. And all that's left of Scientology is the hardcore. Mm-hmm. There's no periphery anymore. Hubbard always wanted it that way. He always wanted you're either 100% in or you're out of Scientology. And he's got some sort of infamous quotes about that. But always there were people who were sort of dabbled on the fringes and, kind of didn't really get themselves heavily involved, but kind of participated a bit in peace. These days, that's a thing of the past. You can't be... You're either inside the mind bubble of Scientology or you're out. There's no black and white, and there's no gray area anymore. It's all black and white. Yeah. You have to be a true believer in order to reject the amount of information and facts that are out there in the world that you come across. Right. You can't, and this is the case. It's not just Scientology, obviously. You're the expert on this field, yep. Sir. People who are in a cult reject anything that doesn't match the agreed upon truth of how the world is. And that agreed upon truth of how the world is their view of how the world is. So in the case of Scientology, everybody who isn't a Scientologist is a WOG, which means that they are either uninformed or evil or both, and that they all need to be enlightened. Until they are enlightened into the real truths of Scientology, they will remain lower level, somewhat beneath a normal humanoid state. And not only that, if they say anything or have any information at all that's contradictory to what the party line is within the Scientology bubble, they're liars. And they don't need to go further than that. If they are on the other side, they are wrong and they are lying.
Right. That's the dispensing of existence of Lifton, demand for purity. But I'll also add, with Scientology, all of those sessions where they were encouraging you to think of all the naughty things you've done in your lifetime and then go into your past lifetimes, all those things are collected in PC folders, is my understanding, and then they can be used against you if you ever leave the organization. So there's yes or no, the potential fear of blackmail?
Well, I think that certainly there is, simply because there is so much information that's collected. And as you know, in Scientology, everything is written down.
Right.
Every single thing. Scientology is the biggest file keeper organization probably in the history of mankind. Like every single tiny thing is written down. And Steve, it's all still written by hand and filed in file folders. I mean, because there was nothing from Hubbard that said you could do it any differently. They're stuck with that.
That's
they're going to be
interesting.
They're going to be stuck with that forever. But I don't honestly believe that the threat of exposing those things that they might have disclosed in their sec checks or confessionals. They call them sec checks, security checks in Scientology.
Those are with cans that presumably are connected to the e-meter, which is presumably a version of lie detectors, which even the FBI lie detectors are not reliable. But nevertheless, go ahead.
But I don't mean to digress too much, but we need to talk about the e-meter, because the e-meter is perhaps Hubbard's greatest stroke of genius. But let me just go back to,
Please.
And I'll come back to that.
Yeah.
The thing about the information that is collected is, I believe that a greater motivation for Scientologists to fear leaving Scientology there's two. One, family and friends. Because if you leave, you lose Scientologists who are either family, friends, your boss, your workers, anybody in your life who is a Scientologist is required to disconnect from you if you leave and do something that Scientology doesn't like. You can kind of leave and slink off into the shadows and never be heard from again, and nothing will probably happen to you. The second motivating factor is that Scientology has convinced every single Scientologist that their future eternity is dependent upon them remaining in Scientology and continuing up Hubbard's bridge to total freedom. This is a hugely important motivator for everybody in Scientology. The carrot of Scientology is in some ways more powerful than the threat of heaven and hell in Christianity, or going to, whatever the Muslims call their place of afterlife that's all virgins and honey.
Right.
This is because in Scientology it is presented that you can have pieces of that eternity in this life. It's not even that you have to wait until you die. You can have some of these astonishing revelations and powers and things that come with Scientology right here and right now, if as long as you pay enough.
Mm-hmm.
But let me just go back to the e-meter. I know I talk long, Steve. I know you have to like fight to get a word in edgeways with me.
It's okay. It's your book, and there's a lot to explain. Obviously, I have, as an ex-Moonie, who, when I left and spoke out about the Moonies, I befriended Paulette Cooper, who was speaking out about Scientology. So I went on TV with an ex-Scientologist, and I was called an SP, and I'm like, what's that? And then I, started experiencing the bad stuff for speaking out against Scientology. But back to you. You were the former number 3 guy. You were at the top, so you have a perspective that's so rare for people to understand.
Yeah, and I think that what I tried to do in my book is give that perspective from my earliest years of how did I get sort of into this? In what way do you teach a child to have a belief system that the parents have come across and now firmly believe in? And how do you get, what's the process like? And what's the process like of once you sort of stop buying into it? How do you get into the mindset that this is the only thing? How do you get into the mindset that it's okay to go out and destroy people's lives? How is it like? I don't consider myself an inherently aggressive, nasty person. Mm-hmm. But was I an aggressive, nasty person when I was in Scientology? Absolutely. Was I, literally working to destroy people's lives? Yes. And
righteously.
That's exactly right. And I thought I was absolutely righteous in doing so.
Right.
That this was something that every man, woman, and child on earth ultimately would thank me for.
Yep.
For doing the favor to them, doing the hard, dirty work on their behalf, to ensure that they themselves would have and achieve spiritual salvation.
Yeah, that's an important point, that in the mind of the cult member, they really believe they're doing good.
Oh, yes. Yes.
They're not thinking, I want to do evil to disrupt people's lives. Right?
No, and I often say this, Steve. The vast majority of Scientologists are wonderful, kind, nice people who believe that they have found a way not only to help themselves, but to help other people. They really strongly believe that it's almost like they're sacrificing for the good of mankind.
Right.
And that they are very noble in that.
Yeah, Mooney's same way, buddy.
They take a lot of slings and arrows. They eat a lot of shit. They're they don't go on vacations. They this, they that. They spend money they shouldn't have. They really don't have because they believe that they're helping something good.
Right.
And it's only when you get to the sort of very top of the pile do you find the sociopaths and the malignant narcissists who are ultimately benefiting from all of this pain and suffering that people are going through, and derive their sort of sense of power and their lust for power by exploiting people like that. And
So for my listeners, I just want to comment that my work as a mental health professional, the best frame, I think, to understand the phenomenon is a dissociation between your authentic self and your cult self. And what I found as I was being promoted up the cult ranks was, I was told to be like Sun Myung Moon, think like him, walk like him, talk like him. And I got more and more narcissistic and more justifying doing things like telling people to drop out of college or donate their trust fund or whatever without any hesitation. But the authentic me would never do anything like that, would never lie. I was just like a very honest person. And yet, so the point is, for you, you were such a child. You didn't, in a sense, understand what's normal. Like, what would a normal family upbringing be? And so you were just programmed from, age 5 to be this version of Hubbard's ideal person. No?
Right. No, that's exactly right, Stephen. That's what I really have tried to explain in the book, like the thought process and what was I thinking when that happened and what happened next and how was like when I grew up in Australia in the 60s, Scientology was basically banned. Like it was not.
There was a government report in the 60s, wasn't there?
Yeah.
It was a very good report.
In a couple of states, it was illegal to practice Scientology. And I grew up with this mindset that this is people who are trying to stop the good. And it was very, very vivid to me as a child that because I looked at my parents and went, these are good people. They're nice. They're very kind to me. They don't beat me. They're like, I love my parents. Mm-hmm. And yet people are trying to stop them from doing what they want to do in life and think the way that they want to think. That seed, Hubbard, like all cult leaders, has the us versus them story.
Yeah, you need a big devil, Mike. You always need an enemy.
The monster on the other side of the equation that is, we are fighting against the good fight against the monster. Right. And one of the big monsters that Hubbard put out there is the government. And the government is influenced by psychiatrists and medical doctors. And he had a particular thing about psychiatrists and medical doctors because they didn't like Dianetics, and they said it was...
Way before that, didn't he ask for help and said he was depressed from a psychiatrist and he was angry that they didn't take him seriously?
Yes.
And they didn't help him?
Yes, that's exactly right. But he made the world a dangerous environment that only Scientology could solve. And part of that dangerous environment is the psychiatric medical community, hand in hand, arm in arm with the forces of the government. And they're all like fascists who are trying to destroy any hope and good for mankind and blah, blah, blah. Well, for me, Steve, this rang true based on my experiences as a child. It was like, oh yeah, this guy has actually figured something out here. He's on to something. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more the establishment says there's something wrong with you, the more you're right.
You double down, right?
Yeah.
Cognitive dissonance theory.
It's like it just makes everything true. if
Well, we felt the same way in the Moonies. The more they wrote bad things, the more we were being persecuted by Satan. And we had to double down. It's just a different form. And Scientology wasn't even with tax exemption status for 25 years. But that you did a whole campaign. I interviewed Larry Brennan, who was given the task by Hubbard to get the lawyers together and figure out how to make it a religion. But anyway, we have no standards in the United States to evaluate whether a group should be given tax-exempt religious status. All you need is someone to say, I had a revelation. And I have some ideology and I have some followers. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. there is, I have long advocated for the model that is used in many other countries, which is a charitable public benefit test. In other words, yeah, you can say you believe whatever you want, but the theory of tax exemption is that an organization provides services that the government doesn't have to provide to the populace. That religious organizations, by their very nature, are helping people who otherwise would turn to the government for help, so we don't want to tax them. In the United Kingdom, for example, there is a public benefit test that is administered by the Charity Commission.
Right.
And the Charity Commission has to review your activities and be satisfied that you are, in fact, providing a good for the public. And we could never pass that test. Scientology could never pass that test. I went to England with David Miscavige and Tom Cruise to try and handle the English government to grant Scientology charitable status. Still doesn't have it to this day, and never will, because actually Scientology's only charitable activities outside of the bubble of Scientology are those that they can take a photo or video of and put out a press release about. Right. They don't do any charitable work. They only do what they can turn into some sort of a PR spin about, look, we're out helping.
Yeah, and you've got to pay to go up the bridge, or you have to sign your life over to work as a slave or virtual slave in exchange for this technology that's going to help you advance.
Yeah, and Scientology just does not believe in charity. Just as a fundamental concept, it's the make the able more able. Don't validate or recognize or whatever the downstats. Right. Include those who may need charity. Right. So it's
charity outside. I want to come back, if I may, for 1 second. You used the term WOG. And yeah. I remember my friend John Atack, who wrote Let's Sell Them a Piece of Blue Sky, said that stood for Worthy Oriental Gentlemen, which was a racist slur against Oriental people. Is that
yes?
Is that correct?
I mean, well, there is a lot of debate about where the term really comes from. Some people think it comes from pollywog, which was a little black doll that was popular in England in the 18th century, like little black with afro hair and stuff.
But so I really want to also ask you to talk about celebrities like Tom Cruise, who's the big draw, I guess, or was you being used to recruit not only other wannabe actors and actresses, but to recruit others. Like, is there any hope that he's going to wake up and join us?
I doubt it. I think he's a very, very hardcore, but you can never say never. People thought I'd never leave either, so
I didn't believe it.
I know, but Tom Cruise is sort of the epitome of what Hubbard set out to accomplish. Because in the 50s, Hubbard had a fascination or fixation almost with celebrities, and wanted and believed that by attracting celebrities to Scientology, they would influence others. And he was right about that. That's a very
influential,
very appropriate observation for someone to make who is trying to get new people to come in. And Tom Cruise has become the poster child for that endeavor that was laid out by Hubbard. There are organizations within Scientology called celebrity centers that are devoted entirely and only to helping and servicing celebrities. And this is also something that makes Scientology pretty unique. There isn't anybody else that's got that. No other organization that calls itself a religion has a you can't go to the temple for celebrities. It's like it's like they're all welcome here, or the cathedral of Saint, Frank Sinatra doesn't exist. That just, a celebrity is no different than another member of any other religion. But in Scientology, they have a special place.
Well, cults, cults love celebrities, and they use them to recruit others. But correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, isn't he surrounded by like Sea Org members and other cult members who are kind of making sure that he stays in the bubble and reporting him if he ever does anything where he
that's absolutely correct, Steve. But if you look, he's not being very successful at getting people into Scientology at this point. Certainly not other celebrities. Tell me the last new celebrity that has emerged and been recognized as a Scientologist. The only ones that have come forward in like the last 10 years are those who were raised Scientologists. Elizabeth Moss being the most prominent.
Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah. Everybody else is old school, like really old school now, like older than me and you. They're like old people. There's no new, young, up-and-coming Timothy Chalamet or any of these other big actors in Hollywood. They're not getting involved in Scientology these days. Right. It used to be that was a possibility. If you've got access to Google now, you're pretty much never going in. Google and the internet has been the death of Scientology, or is creating the slow death of Scientology.
Yeah, I was recently out in California helping a family, and I turned on the TV cable, and I was surprised to see the Scientology channel, and I spent 5 minutes, and it was so slick. And man, if you didn't know anything about Scientology, wow.
It's very slick. They have a lot of slick stuff. They're also spending huge amounts of money to subsidize that. I mean, there's no ads on there. They're paying for a cable TV channel that nobody watches just so it's out there. I mean, they have less followers on any of their social media than I do. Like, me.
Well, you're a celebrity now, Mike. You paid your dues.
Yeah, but not to that extent, Steve. I'm no Kim Kardashian. I'm not even Leah. I've got like not that many followers. Maybe 100,000 followers on Twitter, or
that's a lot.
80,000 on Instagram. But they have like 5,000 or 3,000. And they've got a full-time 24/7 TV channel that promotes every one of their social media sites, and all their social media sites promote they've got this huge conglomeration of websites and social media and TV and all these things all cross-promoting one another, and they still don't get anywhere.
Yay. I'm so happy
of course.
about that. I want to cover a few more things, if I may, Mike, in our time together. So there was a lawsuit filed for trafficking by young people. Can you talk about that effort?
Yes. That's Valeska and Gawain and, oh gosh, I can't remember her name. His wife, Baxter, who filed a lawsuit claiming essentially that they had been trafficked and falsely imprisoned as children growing up in the Sea Org. I'm not necessarily giving you the exact terms of art and the exact torts that are being sued over, but essentially they are saying we were treated as slaves and that we were unable to leave of our own free will, and effectively our lives were taken away from us.
Yeah, and I really, as an expert on trafficking, labor and sex trafficking, fraud, force, or coercion, Scientology seems to be doing all of those.
Yep. I mean, there was a very, very well researched article that appeared like a month ago in New York Magazine about this exact subject of bringing people into the United States on false visa applications, as religious workers when they're really not.
Right.
And the claims in the lawsuit go well beyond that sort of thing. This is being shipped off to this free winds ship in the Caribbean to get them away from other family members or the influence of family members, or, threatening situations with someone threatening a lawsuit or whatever, and bustling them off and then basically keeping them on a prison ship.
Yeah.
And we will see how this case goes. Scientology obviously has a huge, monstrous litigation machine that sort of rumbles into action every time someone files a lawsuit, and they roll in with dozens of lawyers and all sorts of big muckety-muck, big-name guys who
but the lawyers are making a fortune off of Scientology, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, probably the most lucrative job in the world is to be a lawyer for Scientology.
Yeah.
Those
Tell our listeners how much a member of the Sea Org gets paid per month. Please.
Well, these days it's gone way up.
Oh,
it's like $200 a month.
But what was it when you were in?
Well, okay. Let me just tell you this, Steve. This is the theory of how much you get paid. Paid. When I first joined the Sea Organization in 1973, it was $12 a week. Then eventually it went up, and like by the 80s, 90s, it had kind of got up to like $43, and then it was $50. But the $50 is contingent upon whatever organization that you are working in as a member of the Sea Org actually having that money. And despite the enormous wealth and revenue that Scientology...
What's your estimate of what they got in the coffers? Any idea?
North of $3 billion.
Okay. It's disgusting.
Yes. But despite how much money they take in, there are all these rules and regulations about where that money shall go. And first of all, it has to flow up the lines to make it into Sea Org reserves, and you have to pay the bills of RTC and all the other senior entities and corporations, and then you have to do this, and then you have to do that. And the pay for the stuff is always one of the last things on the list. And if you get to the end of the list and you don't have any money left, tough.
Right.
So
there's no real remuneration. What about health insurance or retirement funds?
No, there's no such thing either. Health insurance the theory is that they are self-insured. The truth is that what happens is most people in the Sea Organization who suffer some condition will wait for a considerable period of time before they get to see some sort of medical professional to diagnose and treat them. Unless it's they fall off a building and smash their arm and then an ambulance comes. Mm-hmm. But often they are sent to, like in Los Angeles, to the USC hospital that treats the indigents off the streets and
the
wait
Mooney
in line.
Strategy, yeah, send them
and wait in line to claim that you don't have any money, because they don't.
Yeah.
Even though the organization does and is supposed to be looking after them, the individual does not. Right. So they wait in line to get some sort of assistance from the government and It's and retirement, no such thing. Just there is no such thing. What happens to old members of the Sea Organization is a whole other tragic story of abuse and neglect, and it is terrible. And it really is a story that is yet to be told. And sooner or later, I'm going to get around to telling it for real.
Yeah, it's just a travesty. And I remember when they got when Scientology, I know we're suing IRS commissioners and lied on their application to get tax exemption. When they finally got it, then they were pushing Bill Clinton and the State Department to pressure Germany that they were persecuting, religious freedom in Germany.
Right.
And the Germans are like, we know about cults.
Yeah,
This is not a religion. They're not helping anybody publicly.
Right. And they believe in Supermen. And that was a big thing for the German government, that Scientology promotes the idea of this, we will create a master race effectively. And the master race is OTs and people who have cleared themselves of their reactive minds, who are homo novus. That was Hubbard's term. They're no longer homo sapiens. They are now homo novus. And these are the top people.
No, the master race. You said it exactly right. The Moonies the same, by the way. Through Moon and the mass weddings, we were going to be sinless, and we had the master race, and we would kill everybody when we took power who didn't want to join, the master race.
Right. So that made Scientology distinctly unpopular with the German government, and there was a lot of time and effort put into, and this is where we sort of go back to, here's where the celebrities come in. Tom Cruise is promoting, and I talk about it in the book, to get his lawyer, Burt Fields, to take out an ad in the International Herald Tribune with a bunch of his clients signing on, saying, an open letter to Helmut Kohl, the Chancellor of Germany at the time, that you're mistreating Scientology like the Third Reich mistreated the Jews, and John Travolta going to D.C. to meet with the State Department and get the Secretary of State engaged and speaking on behalf of Scientology. This is the sort of the other side of the Scientology celebrity world of how do we use them to help us influence or get what we are trying to get. Because, like it or not, it's not just the man on the street that listens to celebrities. Politicians listen to them, all sorts of elected officials and others who should know better.
So forgive me, because we're running out of time. I want you to comment, because you were head of the Office of Special Affairs. Ex-Scientologist Jeffrey Augustine recently did a blog post and an interview with me about cult apologists being hired to say there's no such thing as brainwashing or mind control. This is religious freedom. Leave these people alone. Right. Please share your experience in that whole.
Exactly the same as yours, Steve. And I have spoken to Jeffrey about this at some length, and to Tony Ortega, and to
Chris Shelton, I believe.
Chris Shelton, and this is to be kind, I will say that there are certain people who will say anything for money. Mm-hmm. To be more blunt, I was going to say, to be more blunt, there are whores in the world who will do whatever you want and say whatever you want, as long as there is something in it for them.
Right.
And that's what these cult apologists are. They came up with the term new religious movements in order to try and sort of tone down the rhetoric, so to speak. They've got all their little catchphrases that they use. I originally was one of the people that went and found Brian Wilson.
Yeah,
And
please
Brian
tell
Wilson,
that story. That's so important.
Brian Wilson was a professor of, I think it was comparative religion at Oxford, and
Oxford
highly,
University.
highly respected and regarded, and brought him to St. Hill, which is the headquarters of Scientology in England, and gave him a tour. And he's such a nice gentleman. Or he was a very, very nice gentleman, but a very prototypical pointy head,
academic. You mean?
Yeah, academic. Yes, I like to use the a proper term.
Scholarly,
very scholarly, like Scientology does with everything like this. They got professors at Florida State University do a study about Scientology's economic impact on Clearwater and took all their information from Scientology. And Brian Wilson had a very curated view of Scientology. He was introduced to people, hand-selected, of course, by us. He was given information, hand-selected by us. He then wrote this thing about apostasy and apostates.
Yeah, how'd you get him to do that and say, don't listen to any former members or critics?
Well, that's why I'm bringing this up.
Okay, go for it. Sorry.
Because this was a very, I remember there were discussions with him, and he would talk about the idea that apostates have to find something wrong with the organization that they left. And we were like, oh, yes, love that. That's a great one. Perfect. How do we reinforce that? Okay, let's feed you the information about these people and say, look, this person was totally well treated, and they wrote all these success stories, and they said all these nice things, and then as soon as they left, they started saying horrible things about us. But look at what they were saying when they were here.
Right.
This is just a phenomenon, and you can probably describe this and explain it, because we see this happening over and over, and they write these and this is something that Scientology has, Steve.
Yeah.
Success stories. It is another
That's what the Chinese communists had people write their, bad history and their success now that they're a member of the proletariat.
And that's exactly what Scientology does every day of the week. Every single thing, every course you complete, every auditing program that you complete, you need to write a success story. Right. And for it to be accepted by the organization as being, rah-rah enough.
Right.
And so when you've got those sort of things to present to someone like Brian Wilson, and he sits down and he looks at those and goes, wow, they were really doing well. Everything was happy, blah, blah, blah. They had lovely things to say, blah, 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 blah,
and
blah.
And that led to a whole bunch of other sociologists of religions saying, pretty much, don't accuse Aum Shinrikyo of the sarin gas attack. This is religious persecution, except they did it.
Right, exactly. And you can't rely on the testimony, eyewitness testimony of anybody who has left a cult, because they are apostates. So Chris Shelton, nothing he experienced in his life has any validity because he's an apostate. I'm an apostate. Leah's an apostate. It's so convenient.
Me too.
It's so convenient. It's like the perfect
discrimination is what it is.
Well, it's the perfect dispensing mechanism.
Right.
We just and
they're not human. They're not valid. Only we have validity.
But it's not us saying it. It's the authority, the experts, the academic geniuses that study all this stuff
the
that are saying
Massimo
this.
Intravignes and the Eileen Barkers, etc.
Exactly.
I want to move on because we're running out of time, and you're just a wealth of knowledge, and I really appreciate you giving me the time. Talk about Scientology's plan to destroy the Cult Awareness Network and how they went bankrupt, and the leading group trying to help people exit cults was taken out of existence by Scientology.
Well, the Cult Awareness Network, as you probably know, was a big thorn in the side of Scientology because it was a place before the internet where people could go and get information.
Right.
Remember, before it was easy to Google something, you had to go find it somewhere. Like a library, like a newspaper archive, a phone number,
microfiches.
Yeah, and that's what the Cult Awareness Network was. It was like both a rallying point and a library of information.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was determined by us people that they needed to be put out of action. And there were various things done. I mean, there were spies sent in on Cynthia Kisser and the Cult Awareness. Cynthia was the head of the Cult Awareness Network,
right?
That were monitoring everything that they were doing. There was ultimately a lawsuit that was filed by someone who claimed to be a victim in some fashion. I don't even remember all the details.
I think they were suing for membership, and they weren't given membership. And
well, there
so
was
they
that too.
Yeah,
there was also a bunch of Scientologists that said, we want to join the Cult Awareness Network, and were denied. And they claimed that this was discriminatory, that they were being discriminated against based on their religious beliefs. There was like an all-out assault that was launched on them. Freedom Magazine articles, sending investigative journalists to go ambush interview them, etc., etc. And ultimately what happened was there was a judgment against them for something, and I think it was one of these, this plaintiff that was represented by Rick Moxon, who filed a lawsuit for being deprogrammed.
No, he claimed, they claimed that the Cult Awareness Network is a deprogramming, kidnap thing.
Anyway,
which it wasn't.
In the end, what happened was the Cult Awareness Network had to file for bankruptcy, and Scientology purchased it in bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And continued to operate the phone line, the 1-800 whatever number the Cult Awareness Network had, except now it was manned by Scientologists.
Right. Yeah, it was horrible. It really destroyed us. The one other organization concerned about cult mind control at the time was the American Family Foundation, that rebranded as ICSA, or the International Cultic Studies. And they decided, because they didn't want to be sued, come on in. Come to our meetings. Send whoever you want to. So they were inviting Scientologists and Moonies and cult apologists into us who were like horrified. Why are you doing this? And they were like, we don't want to get sued out of business.
Right.
It was horrible. So leave us with some hope and some positive thoughts that you have.
Well, here's some hope, Steve. In fact, I say at the beginning of the book, it's never too late to change. It's never too late to start a new chapter in your life. Mm-hmm. And I hope that this book encourages people that if I could do it at 52 years old, anybody can do it. Whether you're in a cult or whether you're in an abusive relationship or a bad job, that there is always a way to change things in your life, no matter how impossible it may seem. And that is probably the greatest hope that anybody could have.
46 years, because I have people who say, oh, she's in 5 years, she's never coming out. And I'm like, that's nothing. I know people like Mike who's left after almost 5 decades. And being at the top of the top. I need to ask you, as we wrap up, what made you leave? What can you say about that?
Well, this is something I talk a lot about in the book, but it was a long process to get there. and I was really wanting to, but I was afraid of losing my children and my wife. I was in England dealing with John Sweeney from the BBC, and he was asking me on camera, what about David Miscavige physically assaulting you? And I was telling him he was a liar, and
but he actually did assault you, right?
He actually did on many occasions. And then I walked away from that interview, and I'm like, what am I doing? This is not why I came into Scientology. I was here to solve the problems of the planet and help people. And I'm now defending this little guy who's physically abusing people, including me. Why? But still, I had this, I can't just abandon my children and my wife. And then Miscavige, I was in England, Miscavige wrote a letter to someone with a CC to me and said, Rinder's never coming back to the United States. And I quote this letter, and he's being sent to the furthermost reaches of Western Australia. I'm going to give him 10 quid, and if he can't survive on that, he can sell his body on the street. And
this is the head of Scientology who did a coup after Hubbard died, threw out the other top people, right? David Miscavige, the one that Leah Remini says she was asking what happened to his wife.
Yep, that same one.
The same one. Okay, just wanted to make sure our listeners know.
And I got that copy, and I went, okay, there's nothing left. There's nowhere to go. This is as bad as it can possibly get. It can't be worse outside of the bubble. Yeah. It can't be worse on the other side. I'm done. And while I was instructed to, return to the headquarters in St. Hill, I said, okay, I'm going. I'm going to catch the tube and get back to Victoria Station and then catch the train. And I walked out quickly before anybody could realize what was going on, and walked to the tube and got off at Leicester Square and disappeared.
And would I assume that you reached out to a former Scientologist, former friend? And
several. I reached out, and the one that I was able to contact first was Tom DeVocht, who has also appeared in a lot of things subsequently, and had been a friend since he came into the Sea Org when he was 11. Yeah. And I flew to Orlando, and he kindly took me into his house and sort of nurtured me back to health. And from there, I went to my oldest friends in the Sea Organization, which was, ironically, Ronnie and Biddy Miscavige, David's older brother, and his wife. And I stayed with them in Williamsburg, Virginia for some time, and then eventually got a job and an apartment and blah, blah, and went on from there.
Yeah, no, it's so important that people really get that former members comprise a network where we really try to reach out and help each other once we experience somebody's light bulb lighting up.
That's so true, Steve. In fact, a number of us formed the Aftermath Foundation, where we actually, our mission is to help people escaping from Scientology.
Yeah, that's awesome. We need one of those for every cult, frankly. we need more help.
Maybe the Aftermath Foundation will continue to grow and expand, and we can expand out to other organizations too.
Yeah,
it's our desire to help everybody. We just have our hands full with the Scientology ones at the moment.
Right. So I want to wish you the best of success in your book. By the way, we share the same Simon & Schuster publisher. I hope they help you promote it vigorously. And I really appreciate you being a stand-up, I got out guy. And that's a hashtag that we're trying to use to destigmatize the fact that intelligent, educated people can leave a destructive cult and be a thriver afterwards. So thank you so much. And regards to Leah. Any final words you want to leave us with? I think we
No, Steve. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your intelligence and your intellect and your take on things. And it's always nice to have a conversation with someone who really does understand. You know, you and I, like when I talk to John Atack, we have to get out of our own shorthand to explain to listeners what we're talking about. And that's a pleasure, because oftentimes it is feeling somewhat frustrated having to explain everything to the person who is on the other side of the microphone.
Yeah, there's a whole language system in Scientology that outsiders don't understand at all. But I guess I just want to wrap up by saying, you know, John was so fair-gamed. We're going back to the beginning of our interview. He went bankrupt and they smeared him. Maybe you smeared him, or your people smeared him in the belief that you were helping the planet. But he, you know, still is thriving, and he's, you know, basically working to help protect people, especially young children, to understand malignant narcissists and such. But
wonderful friend at this point.
Yeah, for me, I always regretted the harm that I caused as a leader in the Moonies. And people said, Steve, you were like a Nazi because you were just like, do it or else. But to try to reach out and say, I'm sorry, I was doing what I believed was right, and I wish I could go back in time and do it differently and not do the harms that I did at all.
Yeah, but you can't do that, and neither can I. What we can do is go forward in time and help other people not have to suffer similar fates.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm just putting it out there that I made an effort to every person I recruited in the Moonies, and it took me 20 years to help them get out. I made an effort to apologize to them because it really was a burden on my heart.
I hear you.
Yeah.
I hear you.
Regards. Thanks so much. Take care, buddy.
Okay, Steve. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.